I'm not sure why I'm writing this down on paper and not on my computer. I guess I've just noticed some odd things. It's not that I don't trust the computer, I just need to organize my thoughts. I need to get down all the details somewhere objective, somewhere I know that what I write can't be deleted or changed. Not that that's happened, it's just everything blurs together here and the fog of memory lends a strange cast to things. I'm starting to feel cramped in this small apartment. Maybe that's the problem. I just had to go and choose the cheapest apartment, the only one in the basement. The lack of windows down here makes day and night seem to slip by seamlessly. I haven't been out in a few days because I've been working on this programming project so intensively. I suppose I just wanted to get it done. Hours of sitting and staring at a monitor can make anyone feel strange, I know, but I don't think that's it. I'm not sure when I first started to feel like something was odd. I can't even define what it is. Maybe I just haven't talked to anyone in a while. That's the first thing that crept up on me. Everyone I normally talk to online while I program has been idle, or they've simply not logged on at all. My instant messages go unanswered. The last email I got from anybody was a friend saying he'd talk to me when he got back from the store, and that was yesterday. I'd call with my cell phone, but reception's terrible down here. Yeah, that's it. I just need to call someone. I'm going to go outside. Well, that didn't work so well. As the tingle of fear fades, I'm feeling a little ridiculous for being scared at all. I looked in the mirror before I went out, but I didn't shave the 2-day stubble I've grown. I figured I was just going out for a quick cell phone call. I did change my shirt, though, because it was lunchtime, and I guessed that I'd run into at least one person I knew. That didn't end up happening. I wish it did. When I went out, I opened the door to my small apartment slowly. A small feeling of apprehension had somehow already lodged itself in me. For some indefinable reason, I chalked it up to having not spoken to anyone but myself for a day or two. I peered down the dingy gray hallway, made dingier by the fact that it was a basement hallway. On one end, a large metal door led to the building's furnace room. It was locked, of course. 2 dreary soda machines stood by it. I bought a soda from one the first day I moved in, but it had a 2-year-old expiration date. I'm fairly sure nobody knows those machines are even down here, or my cheap landlady just doesn't care to get them restocked. I closed my door softly and walked the other direction, taking care not to make a sound. I have no idea why I chose to do that, but it was fun giving in to the strange impulse not to break the droning hum of the soda machines, at least for the moment. I got to the stairwell and took the stairs up to the building's front door. I looked through the heavy door's small square window and received quite the shock. It was definitely not lunchtime. City gloom hung over the dark street outside, and the traffic lights at the intersection in the distance blinked yellow. Dim clouds, purple and black from the glow of the city, hung overhead. Nothing moved, save the few sidewalk trees that shifted in the wind. I remember shivering, though I wasn't cold. Maybe it was the wind outside. I could vaguely hear it through the heavy metal door, and I knew it was that unique kind of late-night wind, the kind that was constant, cold, and quiet, save for the rhythmic music it made as it passed through countless unseen tree leaves. I decided not to go outside. Instead, I lifted my cell phone to the door's little window and checked the signal meter. The bars filled up the meter, and I smiled. Time to hear someone else's voice, I remember thinking, relieved. It was such a strange thing to be afraid of nothing. I shook my head, laughing at myself silently. I hit speed dial for my best friend Amy's number and held the phone up to my ear. It rang once. But then it stopped. Nothing happened. I listened to silence for a good 20 seconds, then hung up. I frowned and looked at the signal meter again, still full. I went to dial her number again, but then my phone rang in my hand, startling me. I put it up to my ear. "Hello," I asked, immediately fighting down a small shock at hearing the first spoken voice in days, even if it was my own. I had gotten used to the droning hum of the building's inner workings, my computer, and the soda machines in the hallway. There was no response to my greeting at first, but then, finally, a voice came. "Hey," said a clear male voice, obviously of college age, like me. "Who's this?" "John," I replied, confused. "Oh, sorry, wrong number," he replied, then hung up. I lowered the phone slowly and leaned against the thick brick wall of the stairwell. That was strange. I looked at my received calls list, but the number was unfamiliar. Before I could think on it further, the phone rang loudly, shocking me yet again. This time, I looked at the caller before I answered. It was another unfamiliar number. This time, I held the phone up to my ear, but said nothing. I heard nothing but the general background noise of a phone. Then, a familiar voice broke my tension. John was the single word in Amy's voice. I breathed a sigh of relief. "Hey, it's you," I replied. "Who else would it be?" she responded. "Oh, the number. I'm at a party on 7th Street, and my phone died just as you called me. This is someone else's phone, obviously." "Oh, okay," I said. "Where are you?" she asked. My eyes glanced over the drab white washed cylinder block walls and the heavy metal door with its small window. At my building, I sighed, just feeling cooped up. I didn't realize it was so late. "You should come here," she said, laughing. "Nah, I don't feel like looking for some strange place by myself in the middle of the night," I said, looking out the window at the silent, windy street that secretly scared me just a tiny bit. "I think I'm just going to keep working or go to bed." "Nonsense," she replied. "I can come get you. Your building is close to 7th Street, right?" "How drunk are you?" I asked lightheartedly. "You know where I live." "Oh, of course," she said abruptly. "I guess I can't get there by walking, huh?" "You could, if you wanted to waste half an hour," I told her. "Right," she said. "Okay, have to go. Good luck with your work." I lowered the phone once more, looking at the numbers flash as the call ended. Then, the droning silence suddenly reasserted itself in my ears. The two strange calls in the eerie street outside just drove home my aloneness in this empty stairwell. Perhaps from having seen too many scary movies, I had the sudden inexplicable idea that something could look in the door's window and see me, some sort of horrible entity that hovered at the edge of aloneness, just waiting to creep up on unsuspecting people that strayed too far from other human beings. I knew the fear was irrational, but nobody else was around, so I jumped down the stairs, ran down the hallway into my room, and closed the door as swiftly as I could while still staying silent. Like I said, I feel a little ridiculous for being scared of nothing, and the fear has already faded. Writing this down helps a lot. It makes me realize that nothing is wrong. It filters out half-formed thoughts and fears and leaves only cold, hard facts. It's late. I got a call from a wrong number, and Amy's phone died, so she called me back from another number. Nothing strange is happening. Still, there was something a little off about that conversation. I know it could have just been the alcohol she'd had, or was it even her that seemed off to me, or was it? Yes, that was it. I didn't realize it until this moment, writing these things down. I knew writing things down would help. She said she was at a party, but I only heard silence in the background. Of course, that doesn't mean anything in particular, as she could have just gone outside to make the call. No, that couldn't be it either. I didn't hear the wind. I need to see if the wind is still blowing. Monday. I forgot to finish writing last night. I'm not sure what I expected to see when I ran up the stairwell and looked out the heavy metal door's window. I'm feeling ridiculous. Last night's fear seems hazy and unreasonable to me now. I can't wait to go out into the sunlight. I'm going to check my email, shave, shower, and finally get out of here. Wait, I think I heard something. It was thunder. That whole sunlight and fresh air thing didn't happen. I went out into the stairwell and up the stairs, only to find disappointment. The heavy metal door's little window showed only flowing water as torrential rain slammed against it. Only a very dim, gloomy light filtered in through the rain, but at least I knew it was daytime, even if it was a gray, sickly, wet day. I tried looking out the window and waiting for lightning to illuminate the gloom, but the rain was too heavy, and I couldn't make out anything more than vague, weird shapes moving at odd angles in the waves washing down the window. Disappointed, I turned around, but I didn't want to go back to my room. Instead, I wandered further up the stairs past the first floor, and the second. The stairs ended at the third floor, the highest floor in the building. I looked through the glass that ran up the outer wall of the stairwell, but it was that warped, thick kind that scatters the light, not that there was much to see through the rain to begin with. I opened the stairwell door and wandered down the hallway. The 10 or so thick wooden doors, painted blue a long time ago, were all closed. I listened as I walked, but it was the middle of the day, so I wasn't surprised that I heard nothing but the rain outside. As I stood there in the dim hallway listening to the rain, I had the strange fleeting impression that the doors were standing like silent granite monoliths erected by some ancient forgotten civilization for some unfathomable guardian purpose. Lightning flashed, and I could have sworn that, for just a moment, the old grainy blue wood looked just like rough stone. I laughed at myself for letting my imagination get the best of me, but then it occurred to me that the dim gloom and lightning must mean there was a window somewhere in the hallway. A vague memory surfaced. and I suddenly recalled that the third floor had an alcove and an inset window halfway down the floor's hallway. Excited to look out into the rain and possibly see another human being, I quickly walked over to the alcove, finding the large thin glass window. Rain washed down it, as with the front door's window, but I could open this one. I reached a hand out to slide it open, but hesitated. I had the strangest feeling that if I opened that window, I would see something absolutely horrifying on the other side. Everything's been so odd lately. So I came up with a plan, and I came back here to get what I needed. I don't seriously think anything will come of it, but I'm bored. It's raining, and I'm going stir crazy. I came back to get my webcam. The cord isn't long enough to reach the third floor by any means, so instead I'm going to hide it between the 2 soda machines in the dark end of my basement hallway, run the wire along the wall and under my door, then put black duct tape over the wire to blend it in with the black plastic strip that runs along the base of the hallway's walls. I know this is silly, but I don't have anything better to do. Well, nothing happened. I propped open the hallway to stairwell door, steeled myself, then flung the heavy front door wide open and ran like hell down the stairs to my room and slammed the door. I watched the webcam on my computer intently, seeing the hallway outside my door and most of the stairwell. I'm watching it right now and I don't see anything interesting. I just wish the camera's position was different so that I could see out the front door. Hey, somebody's online. I got out an older, less functional webcam that I had in my closet to video chat with my friend online. I couldn't really explain to him why I wanted to video chat, but it felt good to see another person's face. He couldn't talk very long, and we didn't talk about anything meaningful, but I feel much better. My strange fear has almost passed. I would feel completely better, but there was something odd about our conversation. I know that I've said that everything has seemed odd, but still, he was very vague in his responses. I can't recall one specific thing that he said, no particular name or place or event, but he did ask for my email address to keep in touch. Wait, I just got an email. I'm about to go out. I just got an email from Amy that asked me to meet her for dinner at the place we usually go to. I do love pizza, and I've just been eating random food from my poorly stocked fridge for days, so I can't wait. Again, I feel ridiculous about the odd couple of days I've been having. I should destroy this journal when I get back. Oh, another email. Oh my God. I almost left the email and opened the door. I almost opened the door, but I read the email first. It was from a friend I hadn't heard from in a long time, and it was sent to a huge number of emails that must have been every person he had saved in his address list. It had no subject, and it said simply, "Seen with your own eyes, don't trust them, they." What the hell is that supposed to mean? The words shock me, and I keep going over and over them. Is it a desperate email sent just as something happened? The words are obviously cut off without finishing. On any other day I would have dismissed this as spam from a computer virus or something, but the words, "Seen with your own eyes." I can't help but read over this journal and think back on the last few days and realize that I have not seen another person with my own eyes or talked to another person face to face. The webcam conversation with my friend was so strange, so vague, so eerie, now that I think about it. Was it eerie, or is the fear clouding my memory? My mind toys with the progression of events I've written here, pointing out that I have not been presented with one single fact that I did not specifically give out unsuspectingly. The random wrong number that got my name and the subsequent strange return call from Amy, the friend that asked for my email address. I messaged him first when I saw him online, and then I got my first email a few minutes after that conversation. Oh my God, that phone call with Amy. I said over the phone that I was within half an hour's walk of 7th Street. They know I'm near there. What if they're trying to find me? Where is everyone else? Why haven't I seen or heard anyone else in days? No, this is crazy. This is absolutely crazy. I need to calm down. This madness needs to end. I don't know what to think. I ran about my apartment furiously, holding my cell phone up to every corner to see if it got a signal through the heavy walls. Finally, in the tiny bathroom near one ceiling corner, I got a single bar. Holding my phone there, I sent a text message to every number in my list. Not wanting to betray anything about my unfounded fears, I simply sent, "You seen anyone face to face lately?" At that point, I just wanted any reply back. I didn't care what the reply was, or if I embarrassed myself. I tried to call someone a few times, but I couldn't get my head up high enough, and if I brought my cell phone down even an inch, it lost signal. Then I remembered the computer and rushed over to it, instant messaging everyone online. Most were idle or away from their computer. Nobody responded. My messages grew more frantic, and I started telling people where I was and to stop by in person for a host of barely passable reasons. I didn't care about anything by that point. I just needed to see another person. I also tore apart my apartment looking for something that I might have missed, some way to contact another human being without opening the door. I know it's crazy, I know it's unfounded, but what if? What if? I just need to be sure. I taped the phone to the ceiling in case. Tuesday. The phone rang. Exhausted from last night's rampage, I must have fallen asleep. I woke up to the phone ringing and ran into the bathroom, stood on the toilet, and flipped open the phone taped to the ceiling. It was Amy, and I feel so much better. She was really worried about me, and apparently had been trying to contact me since the last time I talked to her. She's coming over now, and yes, she knows where I am without me telling her. I feel so embarrassed. I am definitely throwing this journal away before anyone sees it. I don't even know why I'm writing in it now. Maybe it's just because it's the only communication I've had at all since God knows when. I look like hell, too. I looked in the mirror before I came back in here. My eyes are sunken, my stubble is thicker, and I just look generally unhealthy. My apartment is trashed, but I'm not going to clean it up. I think I need someone else to see what I've been through. These past few days have not been normal. I am not one to imagine things. I know I have been the victim of extreme probability. I probably missed seeing another person a dozen times. I just happened to go out when it was late at night, or the middle of the day when everyone was gone. Everything's perfectly fine. I know this now. Plus, I found something in the closet last night that has helped me tremendously, a television. I set it up just before I wrote this, and it's on in the background. Television has always been an escape for me, and it reminds me that there's a world beyond these dingy brick walls. I'm glad Amy's the only one that responded to me after last night's frantic pestering of everyone I could contact. She's been my best friend for years. She doesn't know it, but I count the day that I met her among one of the few moments of true happiness in my life. I remember that warm summer day fondly. It seems a different reality from this dark, rainy, lonely place. I feel like I spent days sitting in that playground, much too old to play, just talking with her and hanging around doing nothing at all. I still feel like I can go back to that moment sometimes, and it reminds me that this damn place is not all that there is. Finally, a knock on the door. I thought it was odd that I couldn't see her through the camera I hid between the two soda machines. I figured that it was bad positioning, like when I couldn't see out the front door. I should have known. I should have known. After the knock, I yelled through the door jokingly that I had a camera between the soda machines, because I was embarrassed myself that I had taken this paranoia so far. After I did that, I saw her image walk over to the camera and look down at it. She smiled and waved. "Hey," she said to the camera brightly, giving it a wry look. "It's weird." "I know," I said into the mic attached to my computer. "I've had a weird few days." "Must have," she replied. "Open the door, John." I hesitated. How could I be sure? "Hey, humor me a second here," I told her through the mic. "Tell me one thing about us. Just prove to me you're you." She gave the camera a weird look. All right," she said slowly, thinking. "We met randomly at a playground when we were both way too old to be there." I sighed deeply as reality returned and fear faded. God, I'd been so ridiculous. Of course it was Amy. That day wasn't anywhere in the world except in my memory. I'd never even mentioned it to anyone, not out of embarrassment, but out of a strange secret nostalgia and a longing for those days to return. If there was some unknown force at work trying to trick me, as I feared, there was no way they could know about that day. Haha. All right, I'll explain everything, I told her. Be right there. I ran to my small bathroom and fixed my hair as best I could. I looked like hell, but she would understand. Snickering at my own unbelievable behavior and the mess I'd made of the place, I walked to the door. I put my hand on the doorknob and gave the mess one last look. So ridiculous, I thought. My eyes traced over the half-eaten food lying on the ground, the overflowing trash bin, and the bed I'd tipped to the side looking for. God knows what. I almost turned to the door and opened it, but my eyes fell on one last thing, the old webcam, the one I used for that eerily vacant chat with my friend. Its silent black sphere lay haphazardly tossed to the side, its lens pointed at the table where this journal lay. An overwhelming terror took me as I realized that if something could see through that camera, it would have seen what I just wrote about that day. I asked her for any one thing about us, and she chose the only thing in the world that I thought they, or it did not know. But it did. It did know. It could have been watching me the whole time. I didn't open the door. I screamed. I screamed in uncontrollable terror. I stomped on the old webcam on the floor. The door shook, and the doorknob tried to turn, but I didn't hear Amy's voice through the door. Was the basement door, made to keep out drafts, too thick, or was Amy not outside? What could have been trying to get in, if not her? What the hell is out there? I saw her on my computer through the camera outside. I heard her on the speakers through the camera outside, but was it real? How can I know? She's gone now, I screamed, and shouted for help. I piled up everything in my apartment against the front door. Friday. At least I think that it's Friday. I broke everything electronic. I smashed my computer to pieces. Every single thing on there could have been accessed by network access, or worse, altered. I'm a programmer, I know. Every little piece of information I gave out since this started, my name, my email, my location, none of it came back from outside until I gave it out. I've been going over and over what I wrote. I've been pacing back and forth, alternating between stark terror and overpowering disbelief. Sometimes I'm absolutely certain some phantom entity is dead set on the simple goal of getting me to go outside. Back to the beginning, with the phone call from Amy, she was effectively asking me to open the door and go outside. I keep running through it in my head. One point of view says I've acted like a madman, and all of this is the extreme convergence of probability, never going outside at the right times by pure luck, never seeing another person by pure chance, getting a random nonsense email from some computer virus at just the right time. The other point of view says that extreme convergence of probability is the reason that whatever's out there hasn't gotten me already. I keep thinking I never opened the window on the 3rd floor. I never opened the front door, until that incredibly stupid stunt with the hidden camera, after which I ran straight to my room and slammed the door. I haven't opened my own solid door since I flung open the front door of the building. Whatever's out there, if anything's out there, never made an appearance in the building before I opened the front door. Maybe the reason it wasn't in the building already was that it was elsewhere getting everyone else. And then it waited, until I betrayed my existence by trying to call Amy. A call which didn't work, until it called me and asked me my name. Terror literally overwhelms me every time I try to fit the pieces of this nightmare together. That email short, cut off, was it from someone trying to get word out? Some friendly voice desperately trying to warn me before it came? Seen with my own eyes, don't trust them, exactly what I've been so suspicious of. It could have masterful control of all things electronic, practicing its insidious deception to trick me into coming outside. Why can't it get in? It knocked on the door, it must have some solid presence. The door. The image of those doors in the upper hallway as guardian monoliths flashes back in my mind every time I trace this path of thoughts. If there is some phantom entity trying to get me to go outside, maybe it can't get through doors. I keep thinking back over all the books I've read or movies I've seen, trying to generate some explanation for this. Doors have always been such intense foci of human imagination, always seen as wards or portals of special importance. Or perhaps the door is just too thick. I know that I couldn't bash through any of the doors in this building, let alone the heavy basement ones. Aside from that, the real question is, why does it even want me? If it just wanted to kill me, it could do it any number of ways, including just waiting until I starved to death. What if it doesn't want to kill me? What if it has some far more horrific fate in store for me? God, what can I do to escape this nightmare? A knock on the door. I told the people on the other side of the door I need a minute to think and I'll come out. I'm really just writing this down so I can figure out what to do. At least this time I heard their voices. My paranoia, and yes, I recognize I'm being paranoid, has me thinking of all sorts of ways that their voices could be faked electronically. There could be nothing but speakers outside, simulating human voices. Did it really take them 3 days to come talk to me? Amy is supposedly out there, along with 2 policemen and a psychiatrist. Maybe it took them 3 days to think of what to say to me. The psychiatrist's claim could be pretty convincing. If I decided to think this has all been a crazy misunderstanding, and not some entity trying to trick me into opening the door. The psychiatrist had an older voice, authoritarian but still caring. I liked it. I'm desperate just to see someone with my own eyes. He said I have something called cyberpsychosis, and I'm just one of a nationwide epidemic of thousands of people having breakdowns triggered by a suggestive email that got through somehow. I swear he said got through somehow. I think he means spread throughout the country inexplicably. But I'm incredibly suspicious that the entity slipped up and revealed something. He said I am part of a wave of emergent behavior, that a lot of other people are having the same problem with the same fears, even though we've never communicated. That neatly explains the strange email about eyes that I got. I didn't get the original triggering email. I got a descendant of it my friend could have broken down too, and tried to warn everyone he knew against his paranoid fears. That's how the problem spreads, the psychiatrist claims. I could have spread it too, with my texts and instant messages online to everybody I know. One of those people might be melting down right now, after being triggered by something I sent them, something they might interpret any way that they want, something like a text saying, "Seen anyone face to face lately?" The psychiatrist told me that he didn't want to lose another one, that people like me are intelligent, and that's our downfall. We draw connections so well that we draw them even when they shouldn't be there. He said it's easy to get caught up in paranoia in our fast-paced world, a constantly changing place where more and more of our interaction is simulated. I have to give him one thing. It's a great explanation. It neatly explains everything. It perfectly explains everything, in fact. I have every reason to shake off this nightmarish fear that something or consciousness or being out there wants me to open the door so it can capture me for some horrible fate worse than death. It would be foolish, after hearing that explanation, to stay in here until I starve to death, just to spite the entity that might have got everyone else. It would be foolish to think that, after hearing that explanation, I might be one of the last people left alive on an empty world, hiding in my secure basement room, spiting some unthinkable deceptive entity just by refusing to be captured. It's a perfect explanation for every single strange thing I've seen or heard, and I have every reason in the world to let all of my fears go, and open the door. That's exactly why I'm not going to. How can I be sure? How can I know what's real and what's deception? All of these damn things with their wires and their signals that originate from some unseen origin. They're not real, I can't be sure. Signals through a camera, faked video, deceptive phone calls, emails, even the television lying broken on the floor, how can I possibly know it's real? It's just signals, waves, light. The door. It's bashing on the door. It's trying to get in. What insane mechanical contrivance could it be using to simulate the sound of men attacking the heavy wood so well? At least I'll finally see it with my own eyes. There's nothing left in here for it to deceive me with. I've ripped apart everything else. It can't deceive my eyes, can it? Seen with your own eyes, don't trust them, they. Wait, was that desperate message telling me to trust my eyes, or warning me about my eyes too? Oh my God, what's the difference between a camera and my eyes? They both turn light into electrical signals, they're the same. I can't be deceived. I have to be sure. I have to be sure. Date unknown. I calmly asked for paper and a pen day in and day out, until it finally gave them to me. Not that it matters. What am I going to do? Poke my eyes out? The bandages feel like part of me now. The pain is gone. I figure this will be one of my last chances to write legibly, as without my sight to correct mistakes, my hands will slowly forget the motions involved. This is a sort of self-indulgence, this writing. It's a relic of another time, because I'm certain everyone left in the world is dead, or something far worse. I sit against the padded wall day in and day out. The entity brings me food and water. It masks itself as a kind nurse, as an unsympathetic doctor. I think it knows that my hearing has sharpened considerably now that I live in darkness. It fakes conversations in the hallways on the off chance that I might overhear. One of the nurses talks about having a baby soon. One of the doctors lost his wife in a car accident. None of it matters, none of it is real. None of it gets to me, not like she does. That's the worst part, the part one almost can't handle. The thing comes to me masquerading as Amy. Its recreation is perfect. It sounds exactly like Amy, feels exactly like her. It even produces a reasonable facsimile of tears that it makes me feel on its lifelike cheeks. When it first dragged me here, it told me all the things I wanted to hear. It told me that she loved me, that she had always loved me, that it didn't understand why I did this, that we could still have a life together, if only I would stop insisting that I was being deceived. It wanted me to believe. No, it needed me to believe that she was real. I almost fell for it. I really did. I doubted myself for the longest time. In the end, though, it was all too perfect, too flawless, and too real. The false Amy used to come every day, and then every week, and finally stopped coming altogether. But I don't think the entity will give up. I think the waiting game is just another one of its gambits. I will resist it for the rest of my life if I have to. I don't know what happened to the rest of the world, but I do know that this thing needs me to fall for its deceptions. If it needs that, then maybe, just maybe, I am a thorn in its agenda. Maybe Amy is still alive out there somewhere, kept alive only by my will to resist the deceiver. I hold on to that hope, rocking back and forth in my cell to pass the time. I will never give in. I will never break. I am a hero. The doctor read the paper the patient had scribbled on. It was barely readable, written in the shaky script of one who could not see. He wanted to smile at the man's steadfast resolve, a reminder of the human will to survive, but he knew that the patient was completely delusional. After all, a sane man would have fallen for the deception long ago. The doctor wanted to smile. He wanted to whisper words of encouragement to the delusional man. He wanted to scream, but the nerve filaments wrapped around his head and into his eyes made him do otherwise. His body walked into the cell like a puppet and told the patient, once more, that he was wrong, and that there was nobody trying to deceive him. God damn it. Not again, screamed Ricky after opening the much-anticipated email. Pinche pendejo, he said even louder. Hijo de tu puta madre, he picked up his expensive mouse and threw it against the wall. Bisa my culo, puto, he slammed his fists down, shattering the tricked-out, top-of-the-line gaming keyboard. Ricky continued to stare at the message, the words mocking him from his computer screen. The message was topped with a large header in white font that stood in contrast to the black background. Right there, the two hated words that said, story deletion. Ricky is all too familiar with these words. In fact, he should be able to recite the entire message from memory by now. Story deletion. Your story has been deleted because it doesn't meet the quality standards. If you feel that it did meet the standards, please state your case on deletion appeal. Make sure you follow the instructions to the letter there, or your appeal will be automatically denied. Do not attempt to re-upload your story. If you upload it again, you'll receive an 1-day ban from editing, as per the rules. Ricky loves scary stories. He comes from a culture rich in the history of the supernatural and macabre. The only thing he loves more than scary stories is writing scary stories. Sadly, there is one problem. How do I put this? Well, the truth of the matter is, our friend Ricky here is, for lack of better words, a shitty writer. There is zero talent in this poor boy's head, and the same can be said about his imagination too. His characters have no substance. His grammar is atrocious. His plot developments are non-existent, and his word choices are, might I say, infantile. In fact, I would go as far as to say I've seen pigeons shit out more interesting narratives than this kid. Sigh, but I digress. What is truly sad about this whole ordeal is that Ricky truly believes his stories are good. No, he thinks they are great. The dark and sinister entities that inhabit the worlds he creates are far superior to anything seen in a movie or found on the internet, or so he believes. His dark tales are capable of tapping into the primordial pools of terror buried deep within our subconscious minds. That's what he expects his readers to find from every one of his works, whereas you and I would see it for what it is, a juvenile, uninspired, boring piece of shit. Some have even gone as far as to say that his stories are so bad, looking at the words for too long will give you pink eye. One boy claimed, after being forced to listen from beginning to end, Ricky's story gave him an ear infection. Whether any of that is true or not, it is a well-known fact that once you finish reading a story authored by Ricky, you are actually more stupid than you were before you started reading. Brain cells literally drop dead in the middle of whatever brain cells do in their brain cell lives. And believe me, it's not just a few, but a lot of them. Alas, Ricky will not hear it. He doesn't like rejection, and he already has it in his head that they are not even reading his stories. He is convinced they don't even bother to give him the time of day and automatically delete them. The tantrum builds, and his cheeks turn red as he screams out loud, "Why would they not listen to me? They never give me a chance." He knows this to be true, especially in consideration of how they treat him and what they say about his stories. He angrily reads the comments. Bad grammar and punctuation. But I'm new to this site. Can't you just tell me what to fix or fix it yourself? Misspelled words. It's the way my character speaks. Poorly written and awkward sentences. English isn't my first language, so give me a chance. The story is not creepy. What do you mean it's not creepy? They're a fucking witch in the story. How's that not scary? You see, Ricky is a spoiled kid from a well-to-do family. Never has he had to go without. Never has his demands not been met. Never has his ungrateful heart ever been denied a single demand. There was nothing he could not have in his pampered life. However, with such a luxurious lifestyle, he has also never had to dream or aspire for greater things. Despite its value, all the objects of his desire were carelessly tossed to the side or forgotten when interest was lost. They meant nothing to him. Eventually, Ricky turned that frustration outwards upon those who were weaker and less capable of standing up for themselves. For every insult, every slight, and every time he did not get what he wanted, he inflicted that rage back upon the innocent bystanders 10 times over. He terrorized all the children within his sight. Well, tonight that will all change. That is why I have been sent. That is my charge from Emai Ladama. Tonight I will reveal to him the stories of his people and enlighten him about where he comes from. I bring knowledge under cover of night and carry revelation on the tip of my tongue. With his last breath, he will learn this final lesson: thou shalt not suffer the cries of a spoiled child. So, when the boy lays his head upon his pillow and closes his eyes to sleep, he will be unaware of the small leather pouch tucked ever so carefully beneath him. It will call out to her. It will summon her, and she will come. She will drink, even though her thirst for revenge can never be quenched. She will feed her hate, though its hunger can never be satisfied. To understand the events soon to come to pass, we must look to the past. Know this: the more days that go by, the more things stay the same. Long ago, the people of Mexico suffered from the deeds of corrupt men and endured the cruelty of the true rulers of the land, the cartels. While savagery and brutality swept across the plains and darkened the skies like a cloud of locusts, a small village near the city of Catemaco, Mexico, prospered. It remained a tranquil, safe haven, untouched by the evils of men. In those days, the villages were weak and vulnerable. They could not defend themselves against the powerful and corrupt men, infected with the sickness of greed. Government and town officials lined their pockets with the sweat and blood of the poor. No justice or protection ever came for the people. Farmers' crops were plundered and destroyed. Workers were kept in constant poverty. Their sons would be taken against their will by the banditos to replenish their numbers. Alas, it was the daughters of Mexico who suffered the most. Many mothers and fathers could only mourn before a single lit candle, for there was not a body to bury for the funeral. They would live their lives never knowing what became of their beloved child. Too many shallow graves sprinkled the countryside with the bones from unnamed girls. Among this violence, all but one village suffered. Those of questionable character and darkness in their hearts would not dare enter the borders of this town, for its people was under the protection of a powerful curandera. Her name was known from afar, and her magic was strong. The evil men knew this to be true, and they would not risk her wrath upon them. This ate away at their egos, and soon they began to conspire among themselves. In secret and darkened rooms, they plotted how to be rid of this meddlesome woman. Early one morning, the curandera awoke to the sound of a child's cry. It was not a cry of terror, but a cry of pain. She ran out of her small house to see a boy sitting on the dirt path that ran alongside her home. Next to him was an old bike. Hitched to the rear wheel was a weathered cart carrying a large wooden box. He sat crying on the ground, clutching both his arm and leg. Even from a distance, she could see the 2 painful welts upon the boy's skin. The curandera knew precisely what had happened, and took a glass jar of salve from off her shelf. She went out to the boy and warmly said, "Que pasa? Misho, what's the matter?" Little boy, no answer came from the boy. A little irritated, she asked, "Topeka, algo did something sting you? Fue una hormiga o una avispa? Was it an ant or a wasp?" Again, the boy said nothing. The curandera was becoming annoyed. She looked carefully at the boy who sat silently before her. From the clothes he wore, she knew he was a rich man's son, most likely the child of an elected official or a member of the town's elite. She gently applied the medicine to the 2 painful stings. The skin was hot and bright red, surrounding a lump the size of a large grape. When she finished, the boy simply turned and jumped on his bike and pedaled away without a word. This angered the curandera, and she made a mental note. In the very near future, someone will need to teach this boy some manners and the importance of respecting his elders. Shortly thereafter, the curandera went about her day-to-day business and forgot about the rude little boy. That night, after the curandera had laid her head down to sleep, she awoke to a loud bang. Her door had been broken down by several large men. They bound her hands and gagged her mouth to prevent any chance she might utter a hex upon them. They took her wand, made out of the sacred huatulco wood, and snapped it in 2. They removed her saco de curacion medicine bag from around her neck, leaving the poor woman completely defenseless now. The men dragged the woman before the town's clergy, who were the most corrupt of them all. Denied any opportunity to defend herself, the curandera was accused of witchcraft and blamed for this year's drought and the poor harvest. They said she was in league with the devil and proclaimed her to be a bruja. They sentenced her to death. The onlookers cheered upon hearing the verdict. She looked across the crowd and mourned at what she saw. The faces she had known for so long, those faces who came to her when they were sick or needed healing, were gone. In their place were hateful and dark eyes, filled with the bloodlust of an angry mob. She stood on a platform next to a short, thin coffin that stood upright. The crowd shouted and jeered as they grew impatient. She closed her eyes and tried to center herself amongst the shouts of swears and insults. The curandera began to pray. She prayed to the Holy Mother for deliverance. She begged and pleaded to her for protection. She pleaded with all her might. She begged the Holy Mother with desperation, proclaiming her good deeds done and a righteous life she lived. Only silence greeted the curandera. The crowd suddenly grew quiet, and the curandera opened her eyes. She saw the crowd separate in the middle and make a path for a little boy. The familiar child rode an old bike and pulling a cart with a box. He dismounted the bike and walked around to the rear, opened the box that sat upon the cart, and carefully removed a large burlap sack. He held the bag at arm's length and quickly brought it and its contents to the clergyman. As the man of God took hold of the sack, the boy looked up at the woman, smiled, and disappeared in the sea of bodies within the mob. Still bound, she was marched relentlessly to the edge of town. All the way, she was beaten and humiliated by the people who followed along. She was brought before a freshly dug grave and shoved hard into the open coffin. She stared up at the men mocking her from above. Just as they were about to seal the coffin shut, the clergyman held up his large hand with the burlap sack. He flung the bag into the coffin, and the men quickly nailed the lid closed. The men picked up the coffin containing the curandera and dropped it into the dark hole. The sound of dirt covering the coffin was loud and thunderous. The curandera laid terrified in the pitch dark. Just before the light had been extinguished, she saw what had been tossed in here with her. At her feet laid the largest wasp nest she had ever seen. Soon she felt hundreds of thin legs begin crawling over her body. They angrily explored this dark prison as they searched for the one who dared to disturb them. Time slowed as the curandera waited for the first sting to strike her. Once again, she prayed to the Blessed Mother for protection, and still there was only silence. Pain from the first sting exploded over her right cheek. The sharp stinger was stabbed into her flesh. It tore through the skin and went as deep as it could. The wasp contracted its abdomen slightly, pumping its venom into its victim. It pulled out its sharp tip and again jabbed the stinger back into her flesh, for the wasp can use their stingers over again. Even if they have exhausted their venom, they will not stop piercing your skin. She screamed in pain as she was stung again and again. They stung her eyes and crawled into her open mouth and stung her tongue. The insects crawled down her throat and into her ears. Venom filled her veins and her skin turned red as it swelled and burned. The wasp's poison saturated her blood, causing it to thicken and burn. The swelling cut off her breathing and she began to convulse. This angered the little beasts and they stabbed her more relentlessly. Blood trickled from every puncture. Not a single spot on her body was spared from the wasp's sting. The pain continued to grow. Never did it lessen. She was about to call out to the Virgin Mother. Then she stopped herself. Betrayal and abandonment hit her deeply, causing more agony than any wasp could bestow. Anger and hate consumed the woman. She knew what she had to do. She would call out to another deity. This deity would come. She would call out for Santa Muerte. Santa Muerte, I call unto thee. I offer myself to thee. I deny the Holy Mother. I deny the Father. I deny the Son. I deny the Holy Spirit. Take me, and I will do thy bidding. The curandera laid motionless in the darkness, wheezing and gasping for air. Her stings upon her skin were stretched until it tore from the swelling. The swarm of insects continued to poke and jab with their long stingers. The buzzing of their wings was deafening. Then suddenly all was silent. The scraping of long fingernails traveled down the side of the coffin. The curandera tried to open her eyes, but her face was too bloated. It mattered not. She had not sight as the wasp's stingers had penetrated her eyelids and filled her eyes with venom. The scraping stopped, and the curandera heard the low and ancient voice of a woman speak. "Que te pica, mihaija?" What's the matter, my daughter? The crowd had not yet dispersed when the ground began to shake. The men had lingered and were congratulating themselves and laughing when the ground opened up. Black thorns emerged from the soil where the curandera laid, and the dirt blackened with decay. All was still for a moment until a deep and inhuman moan was heard from the sky. It called to its new disciple beneath the ground. The villager cowered when the low voice boomed from the cracks that spread out from the spot of the woman's unholy grave. I curse you. I curse your children. They will taste the venom that now flows in my veins. When I hear a child cry, I will come. I will come for your children. They will feel my sting. I will nest within a home made from their skin. I will use their bones for stirring my brew. I will quench my thirst with their tears. I will dance to a melody made from a symphony of their screams. She let out one final wail of demonic rage until only the sound of wasp wings could be heard. 3 days later, the traitorous boy helped by the curandera disappeared without a trace. It was fate that brought the two together. He had been tasked with finding a wasp nest. It was by chance that 2 of the insects escaped and stung the boy near the curandera's home. She had shown him mercy, and he had repaid her with rudeness and betrayal. An empty bed was all they found, except for the small pouch hidden underneath his pillow. Within, they found it held only a piece of a paper wasp's nest, ash, and a lock of hair cut from the boy's head. She still keeps a part of him on her at all times, even to this very day. As time went by, more and more of the children disappeared. Eventually, like the righteous curandera, the little village died a slow and painful death. The people in that area still speak of the dark bruja. It is told that when the days shorten and the nights grow cold, the children must be especially good and obedient. For if a child is spoiled and shows no respect, the bruja will find you. They say she is dressed all in black and wears a cloak made of wasps. She can fly long distances and climb up walls. She will tap on your window and tempt the child to let her in. Her nails will click and tap on the window pane until the child hears her voice from out of the darkness. So that is the story of La Bruja. She is the one I serve. She is my lady and I serve her well. I find those children who are spoiled and rotten. I find the ones most deserving of the fate my lady brings. And who am I? Well, let's just say that I am someone who is familiar with matters such as these, but that is a story for another time. However, I will tell you this, I am neither angel or demon, but I do perform God's will. I bring balance. That is my mandate from the Heavenly Father. The Bruja has no mercy. She holds dark and powerful magic fueled by an inexhaustible source of hatred and rage. I direct that rage to those deserving of it. Such hatred and wickedness cannot be allowed to roam free and go unchecked. I ensure the innocent are protected and the wicked are punished. So listen to my words, little boy or little girl. Do what you are told. Honor your mother and father. Be on your best behavior. You don't want to end up like Ricky here, now do you? Take heed, for if you do not, there will come a night when you will hear tapping at your window. As the buzzing of 1,000 wings fill your ears, you will hear the low voice of a woman asking, "Que te pica? Mihijo, what's the matter, my child?" My friends and I used to do a lot of geocaching after our senior year in high school. For those who don't know what geocaching is, it's essentially a worldwide scavenger hunt. People will select sites and conceal a geocache somewhere unobtrusive, then post GPS coordinates on geocaching websites where other searchers can download the coords and locate the cache. Usually, people who have found the object, often it's a chest or something hollow, will leave a note or small personal memento for future searchers to find and appreciate. There are several types of geocaches, and most of them are thematic in nature, i.e., scenic destinations, romantic sites, hard-to-reach areas. Each set this story begins when my friends and I decided to try a series of purportedly haunted locales within about an hour's drive of our hometown. It began innocently enough. Most of the sites had spooky backstories that were, of course, entirely fabricated. So we had a great time scaring the piss out of each other and generally creeping ourselves out. We'd begun searching after the sun had set to enhance the creep factor, but by around midnight, most of our large group had dwindled off and gone their separate ways. When we reached our last coord, there was just myself, Rebecca, Kevin, and Evan left, and we were determined to knock it off our list. Rebecca was our guide for the night, in charge of putting in the coordinates and reading us the backstory behind each site. So while I drove, she began reading about the last one out loud to the rest of us. Now, I'm paraphrasing here, but it was something along the lines of, Henkel Asylum, constructed in the early 1900s. The James Henkel Asylum was built to house a burgeoning population of the criminally insane. Men who had committed vile crimes, rape, murder, torture without signs of remorse were deemed mentally unstable and sent to this facility for further study and rehabilitation. Once committed, very few criminals were ever released back into society. And those that were usually had been given frontal lobotomies, a popular experimental procedure at the time, or electroshock therapy, both of which rendered the patient nearly brain dead, capable of performing only rudimentary tasks. Stories contemporary visitors to the asylum report hearing banging noises, cell doors opening and closing, and hearing cackling laughter that is abruptly cut short. It was pretty standard fare compared to the rest of the sites we'd visited that night, and we naturally had a good time psyching each other out for the next 15 minutes while I drove us to the asylum. We'd all heard about it, it was in our local area after all, and we knew it had been condemned and abandoned since as long as any of us could remember, so we figured it'd be a great place to run around and be reckless teenagers without risk of getting yelled at by the cops. When we finally arrived, it looked like something straight out of one of those cheesy B-movies they show on Sci-Fi. Chain link fence with barbed wire around the perimeter, 2 guard towers flanking the main gate, which was, of course, chained and locked shut with a big no trespassing sign hanging from it. The asylum itself was decrepit, looking like it hadn't been touched for decades, which was surprising, since we grew up in a pretty nice area where the municipal lawmakers tried to keep everything looking spiffy for the tourists. Needless to say, we promptly ignored the sign on the front gate and hauled ourselves over, cameras and GPS in hand, and walked towards the asylum. Now, given our attitude towards the previous sites, you've probably gathered that I'm somewhat of a skeptic. I believe that there are paranormal things that can't be explained yet, but I'm not exactly summoning demons in front of a bathroom mirror. So when we opened the main door to the asylum conveniently unlocked, I dismissed the cold burst of wind as just stale pent-up air rushing out after being trapped inside for so long. My friend's bravado, however, quickly disappeared and they began shuffling their feet nervously at the entrance, hesitant to cross that invisible threshold. I took point, chivying them along with prodding taunts, and eventually everyone was inside. It wasn't as bad as I thought it'd be. Things were relatively clean, and the entire building looked like it had been gutted. The paint was peeling, tiles popping up here and there, and the metal trim near the baseboards of the wall was in desperate need of some rust be gone, but aside from that, the place was entirely empty. No crazy-ass chairs with leather straps, no gurneys lying haphazardly around, just an old reception desk and 2 hallways leading off to the different wings. We explored for a few minutes, freaking ourselves out whenever we heard an old pipe rattle or rat squeak, but otherwise it was relatively uneventful. Our fears safely suppressed by the presence of each other, we began to get more adventurous, opening doors and peeking inside. The rooms were all empty, of course. Whatever company had been contracted to clear the place out did a pretty decent job of removing any creepy decor. Bravado returning by the minute, Evan and Kevin dropped back without Rebecca or me noticing. They began running around, making noises to try and scare us, I'm not gonna lie. It worked until I realized they were gone and probably the cause of all the racket, then returned laughing and breathless to a decidedly paler Rebecca. She seemed to be a lot more put off by the whole place than the rest of us, or at least she didn't hide it as well. She quietly suggested we leave. Not to be outdone by the other guys of the group, I told her she was more than welcome to wait in the car if she wanted, but I was going to stick around for a few more minutes. Exasperated but defeated, she finally caved and followed us where the GPS was leading the second floor. This is where I started to feel genuinely scared. Before, I was just kind of creeped out, but there was something about that whole floor that literally gave me shivers, despite it being a warm summer night. We started opening doors like before, but we were all a lot more sober about it. I guess I wasn't the only one who was feeling weird. Finally, about midway through the hall, we opened the door to a room, and there, lying in the middle of the floor, was an honest-to-God straitjacket. I'm not bullshitting you, every other room was devoid of objects, but there it was. A fucking straitjacket, in the middle of the floor of some random-ass room in a condemned mental asylum. We all kind of looked at each other with raised eyebrows as if to say, guys, you seen what I'm seeing? And of course, trying to be a macho man to show off for Rebecca, I piped up with the most ridiculous idea I could think of at the time. Dude, I'm gonna put it on. Years of horror flicks and creepypasta should have trained me to not put on the creepy straitjacket, in the creepy hall, in the creepy asylum. But teenage dumbfuckery won over, and once the words were out, I couldn't just wuss out. Nobody said anything, they just kinda looked at me expectantly, waiting to see if I'd follow through with my boast, determined not to be called a pussy for the remainder of the night, I walked forward into the room and bent down to pick up the moth-ridden restraining device. As I got closer, though, I noticed it wasn't moth-ridden at all, but was actually in pretty decent condition, that is, compared to the rest of the place, which, as I've mentioned, was in shambles. I mean, it had a few stains here and there, but it didn't really smell and it seemed intact enough to put on. As soon as I picked it up, though, I got this overwhelming sense of dread. You know, that drop in the pit of your stomach right as you go over the lip of a roller coaster? That feeling in the bottom of your gut that says, I'm gonna die. I just know it. Yeah, well, I got that. Really strong, and totally ignored it. My desire not to die was outweighed, as it often is in teenagers, by my need to look cool for my friends. So I slipped my hands in the sleeves, one at a time, until it hung loosely from my shoulders. Now, if you've ever seen a straitjacket, you know that you can't tie it up yourself. The whole point is to essentially cross your arms across your chest and tie the sleeves behind your back to prevent whoever's inside from moving their arms, presumably, to stop them from hurting themselves or others. So as I stood there in the middle of the room, I called out to Rebecca, "Hey Becca, help me tie this thing off." She looked, if you'll excuse the pun, pale as a ghost, but she managed to squeak out, I don't think this is a good idea, but again, after some prodding and encouraging, I convinced her to begin tying the sleeves behind my back. Evan and Kevin just stood in the doorway, expressions a mix of admiration and incredulity. At that point in time, I felt like a badass, for about 3 seconds. As soon as Rebecca finished up the last lace, the door to the cell slammed shut, right in Kevin and Evan's faces. I never felt a breeze, and when I asked them later, both of them fervently denied closing it themselves. Skeptic that I am, I still chalk it up to us leaving the front door open and changing air pressures and all that, but it scared the piss out of us nonetheless. Then I felt a pressure on my chest, like someone was sitting on it or as if someone was pulling the sleeves tighter behind me, and it began to get harder to breathe. I couldn't even summon enough air to whisper, much less call out for help. My vision narrowed to tiny specks, and I swear I heard someone laughing shrilly as I neared unconsciousness. The pressure increased with a sudden tug, and my world went black. When I woke up, my vision was foggy, or at least I thought it was, until I realized it wasn't just foggy. It was dark, like staring through a lens that's been collecting soot. I blinked a few times, and the darkness wavered, but didn't dissipate. Now, I've passed out and blacked out before, but whenever I woke up, it was nothing like that. Either my vision gradually cleared up, or it was blurry, but never in my life have I been able to recreate the shadowy haze I saw in the asylum that night. Then, from the murky depths, 2 small pinpoints of light appeared a few inches in front of my face, glaring a lurid red and a dim echo of the laughter I heard before surrounded me. As soon as they appeared, however, they were replaced by 2 brilliant shafts of incandescence, Evan and Kevin, shining flashlights down on my face. The last thing I remember hearing before I lost consciousness was Rebecca's scream and the door banging open, which probably explains why those 2 were standing over me with flashlights in hand. I gradually became aware of a dull murmur that I recognized as Rebecca asking me, "Please wake up, please, please, please wake up," as she shook me. She just kept saying it over and over again, kept sobbing and shaking me. When my vision cleared enough, I glanced over and saw that her eyes were completely red, like she'd been crying for a while. Trying to muster some shred of manliness, I found myself speaking in a surprisingly calm voice, given how I was actually feeling. I remember distinctly what I said, word for word. "Get those fucking flashlights out of my face, you douchebags." Expecting a laugh, or at least some reciprocal insults, I was kinda shocked when they just looked at each other quizzically, seemingly surprised. You're okay?" Evan asked incredulously. "Yeah, why the hell wouldn't I be?" Becca just tied the things too tight. I couldn't breathe, so I passed out. How long was I out for anyway, I inquired. Apparently, it had been long enough for them to untie the straitjacket, allowing me to rub a hand across my face. Another shared look of disbelief. "Dude," Kevin began slowly, "you've been out for like 15 minutes. We were about to call 911. We kept shaking you. Evan even tried pinching you so hard he drew blood, but you wouldn't wake up." I felt a cold chill run down my spine, and the straitjacket, hanging limply from my shoulders, suddenly began to feel a bit tighter. Hastening to pull it off, I tried not to look panicked as I threw it to a corner of the room. Rebecca just sat there, still shaking and crying a little bit, and in spite of the ordeal I'd just gone through, I had enough sense to go over and try to comfort her. We left that room without a word, geocache be damned, and walked back to the car in complete silence, broken only by the occasional sniffle from Rebecca. The sun started coming up, and as I dropped everyone off at their respective homes, we said quiet goodbyes. Rebecca was the last stop before I finally made the trip home myself. Being the gentleman that I am, I walked her to her door, but she paused at the entry and looked me in the eye. In the light of the gray dawn, I could see her eyes were still reddened from all the crying. She was very quiet, and she said, "I have to ask you something." "Yeah, sure, what is it?" I said, half expecting another "you sure you're all right," like I'd been getting the whole ride home. She surprised me by asking, "Do you know how long it took Evan and Kevin to get the door open?" Her eyes held a look that I could never forget. It was raw fear. Something happened in that fraction of time between me blacking out and them getting in there that had absolutely terrified her. And seeing that look, I realized. I was blacked out for 15 minutes. How long was she alone in that room? "No," I replied slowly. "How long?" 5 minutes. They said it took 5 minutes for them to open that stupid door. I was in there and I saw you, and I saw she broke off, another sob stopping her mid-sentence. At that point, I didn't want to know. I still don't want to know. I gripped her by the shoulders and said firmly, "Rebecca, it doesn't matter. No matter what you saw. I'm here, you're here, we're both safe. It doesn't matter. Nothing bad will happen. I promise." She just nodded numbly, opened her door, and walked inside her house. The next time I saw her, she was back to her usual self. But whenever I bring up that night to her, she freezes up and turns to stone, refusing to discuss it. I stand by what I said before. I don't know what happened in that room, and I don't ever want to know. But I still have nightmares about those two glowing red lights in the darkness. And sometimes, as I lapse into sleep, I hear faint echoes of shrill laughter following me down into the depths of unconsciousness. "Quiet down back there," I yelled whilst driving down an all too familiar road. My best friend and his girlfriend wouldn't stop laughing loudly with each other, much like young couples do. I almost regretted bringing them, but I really didn't want to go alone, and inviting one of those two lovebirds meant inviting the pair. They were a package deal. Lucky for me, the torturous sound of laughter would soon cease as we were approaching our destination. "We're here," I stated, less to point out our arrival, and more to shut the two of them up. I just wanted some peace and quiet so I could think clearly. I wasn't exactly mentally prepared for what needed to be done. My aunt's old house was just as I remembered it, a rickety old cottage down a dead-end road in the middle of nowhere, complete with woods, wildlife, and the welcoming smell of roses that she often planted near the stone walkway. That was when it finally hit me. While traversing that very walkway, smelling those very roses, I stopped dead in my tracks, tears welling up in my eyes. "Are you okay?" my friend's girlfriend asked. "Yes, I'm fine. I just need a second." They looked concerned, but understood. What else would they expect of me coming back to my aunt's house right after she died? Honestly, it felt a little weird. I may have been her favorite nephew, but after leaving me everything in her will, it seemed wrong to go out there so soon. The service was held just a day prior. I knew everything she had wasn't much, and I knew I wasn't really there to collect my inheritance, but I still felt bad, and at this moment, I felt even worse. The memories I had of her were being dredged up with every step I took towards the front door. I hadn't seen her since I was 10 years old, but I could play every memory in my head like a movie. I was very close to her in those days. She might as well have been my mom. My actual mother cared for me, but she wasn't loving in the way that my aunt was. I remember visiting her after school and being greeted with some cliché milk and cookies. Instead of watching television like a normal kid, she didn't own one. I would listen to my aunt play the piano for hours on end. We would sometimes go bird watching or work in the garden, things that I have not done or even thought of doing since. These are some of my most treasured memories, and just like treasure, I kept them locked up and hidden away for many years, until now. As I approached the door to the cottage, I stopped in my tracks once more. "Seriously, are you okay?" my friend asked this time, seeming very concerned. He had never seen me like this before. "I'm fine. Why don't you two take that hike you were talking about? I'll go on in and take a look around. You guys can meet me back at the car later." "If you say so." The two of them took off down a trail in the woods, and I was left standing there, looking at the house that I'd not seen in many years. The feeling that overcame me was so strange. It's hard to put into words. It was more than grief, greater than sadness. I guess the best way to say it is that I missed her. It's funny, if she could see me now, she probably wouldn't recognize me. I still I'm tall, bearded, and wear glasses, almost the polar opposite of my appearance as a child. Thinking of this just made me sadder. She would never get to see the man I had become. With one last sigh of emotion, I marched on and reached for the handle on the front door. My aunt didn't have locks on her doors or windows. The house was constructed so long ago that it wasn't even built with them. She could have had some installed, but she didn't feel she needed them out in the middle of nowhere. She brought it up one of the first times I stayed there, saying, "Trust the world, and it will set you free." When I was a kid, hearing her say this made me feel safe, somehow. Being fully grown and recalling this statement now, I find it very peculiar. But then again, that was my aunt for you, unpretentious and oblivious to the rest of the world around her. Honestly, I missed that part of her the most. All of these memories came back to me piece by piece as I pulled the door open. The bittersweet release I felt was interrupted when I saw the inside of the cottage. Everything, and I mean everything, was exactly in its place. It was like I was a kid again, coming over after school to enjoy my aunt's company. My memories were projected right in front of me like a nostalgic outburst of energy. I could see my aunt sitting at the piano, playing as she often would. I could see me, sitting there, eating some homemade cookies, listening intently to the music. I could see her again, cooking dinner in the kitchen, as I sat on the couch reading one of her old books. I walked past these living recollections and went upstairs to see more. I stopped quickly when I reached the top of the staircase. I realized that it only led to the attic. I had no interest in it, remembering that my aunt used it for storage, so I traveled back downstairs. I didn't know what I was looking for, exactly, maybe just a little peace of mind to put my heart at ease. Maybe just something that would let me know without a doubt that my aunt passed away peacefully. In truth, I felt an immense amount of guilt being in that house again, almost too much to bear. When I was just shy of 11 years old, my parents moved out of state. This is when I stopped seeing my aunt. We kind of lost touch, especially seeing as she didn't have any real means of communication out there, no phone, no computer, she didn't even have a mailbox, and the nearest post office was over 20 miles away. Being older now, I could have easily paid her a visit, and I am sure she would have loved to have seen me. I guess I just thought she would always be there. Unfortunately, she had a heart attack, and with no hospital or neighbors for miles, death came knocking on her unlocked door in a hasty fashion. At the very least, this visit had put the fleeting quality of life into perspective for me. At this point, I figured it was the only thing that I would end up taking away from the place. As I made my way down the stairs and back into the living room, I noticed something. I was in such a hurry to escape my corporeal memories that I didn't notice it before. It was the desk where my aunt would sit and write for hours at a time. She said that it helped her experience the world outside of her cottage by writing about how she imagined and wanted it to be. The more I remembered my aunt, the more I could see how isolated and somewhat unstable she really was. She was odd, but I loved her just the same, even now. What I hadn't noticed upon entering the house was that the desk drawer was open. I looked inside and found a single sheet of paper with my aunt's handwriting on it. This is what it said. "To my dearest nephew. If you are reading this, then the cold tides of death have swept me away once and for all. I know that we've not seen each other since you were a child, but I hope you still think fondly back on our time together. I was happy to look after you, and I know that you were happy to spend time with me. I don't want you to be sad or feel off-put about my death in any way. This is how it is, and in turn how it was meant to be. I will always hold you dear in my heart, and I hope you'll do the same for me. I want you to live freely despite this, and enjoy each and every moment of your life, just as I did mine. I will see you again someday, and I look forward to it. Trust the world, and it will set you free." I shed a single tear reading this passage, knowing that my aunt wanted me to find peace in this old house. The very closure I was looking for was in her desk the whole time. The elation I felt almost distracted me from the postscript at the bottom of the page. P.S. Don't go in the basement. How peculiar. What was down there? Was my aunt hiding something? If so, what was it? Curious as ever, I walked over to the basement door with the letter in hand, knowing that the answers were down there. I took one last look at the warning. Don't go in the basement. It was most likely the ramblings of an unstable woman on the verge of death, but what could be the real meaning behind it? Why the basement? Why me? I could recall the basement from when I was younger, but I didn't remember much. I had only been down there once. My aunt was outside gardening while I was inside reading one of her books. I grew tired of reading and set the book down on her desk. Soon after, I began wandering around the house out of boredom. I walked around the entire cottage rather quickly. Eventually, I came upon the basement, somewhere I had never played before. Knowing my aunt wouldn't be in for a while, I decided to venture on. I turned the knob and swung the door open. I could only see the top of the stairs descending down into darkness. Despite the bit of fear rattling in my chest, I pressed on. Once down there, my field of vision was filled with pitch blackness. This caused me to scramble about, looking for a light switch. After a few moments, I bumped into a string dangling from the ceiling in the middle of the room. Upon pulling it, the room lit up, however dimly. What I saw disappointed me. It was a typical basement, but smaller, with concrete walls, a concrete floor, and some pieces of wood sitting off in the corner, probably some old floorboards left over from the house's construction. When you're a kid, there's a bit of mystery and adventure injected into everything you do. This adventure ended on a flat note, leading me to an unused space, lost to the depths of the house. The next thing I remember was my aunt's voice as she came down the stairs yelling, "You can't be down here." She sounded more worried than angry, probably scared I would somehow hurt myself down there. There was more to this memory, but that was all I could recall while standing in front of the basement door. I turned the knob and swung the door open, revealing only the top of the stairs and the basement below, completely void of light. Instead of feeling adventurous like I did as a child, I now felt nervous, repeating the words my aunt had left for me over and over in my head, and then asking myself once more why. I crept down the stairs slowly so as not to shake the foundation. That's what I told myself, but I guess my sluggish pace was largely on account of the fact that I was frightened at what I might find when I reached the bottom. Growing impatient and uncomfortably anxious, I picked up the pace a bit. I felt the concrete below my feet, and I rapidly darted towards the center of the room, reaching for the light, praying that it still worked. I felt around for the string and then pulled it. To my delight, it still harbored electricity. The room became dimly lit. In a panicky state, I spun around looking every which way as I did. What I saw surprised me. There was nothing there. It was just how I left it when I was a kid. Even the old floorboards were there, still untouched. I felt relieved, but far more confused than before. Why didn't my aunt want me to go down there? I pondered for a bit and figured that maybe there was asbestos or mold in the cellar walls. This would explain why she didn't want me playing in there as a kid, and why she didn't want me there as an adult either. She just wanted to keep me safe, like she always did. This made me feel better, but deep down I knew there was more behind my aunt's plea. As I made my way over to the stairs, something gave me pause. Memories were coming back to me. I could recall being in the basement when I was younger, but there was something different about it. Different than how it looked now. There was a door. A door. The door that led straight to the attic. How could I have forgotten? It was all so clear to me now. I remember finding a door down there and entering the attic. I knew that it was the attic because I peered out the window and saw my aunt gardening 2 stories below. I waved to her, but she was too busy to notice me. I found it odd at the time that I was able to travel directly from the basement to the attic without so much as climbing a single step, but I brushed it off. After all, I was only 10, and I had no interest in getting caught up in the semantics of how a house was built. Being older, this strange memory was perplexing. How could the basement lead to the attic? It isn't even remotely possible. I tried to call on some more memories, but the details of that day were still fuzzy. I tried convincing myself that it was a dream I was recalling. How could it have been anything else? It was nonsense, right? There's no way it really happened. Somewhat comfortable with this hypothesis, I continued to the stairs, but not before giving the basement another once-over. What I saw eliminated all doubt from my mind. There, in the middle of the far left wall of the basement, was the door from my memory. I squinted and rubbed my eyes, keeping them closed for a good few seconds before opening them again. When I did, the door was still there, as tangible and existent as ever. This couldn't be. It just couldn't. I knew for a fact that the door was not there just a few moments before, and I had already convinced myself that my childhood memory was nothing more than a bizarre dream. What the hell was going on? There was only one way to find out. After regaining some composure and mustering up a small amount of courage, I walked, however slowly, towards the inexplicable door. My unhurried movements mirrored my hesitant exterior, allowing me to stall for a moment while I gathered some nerve to actually open the damned thing. Despite my slothful motion, I covered the gap in a few seconds, a testament to the basement's small size. The moment of truth was upon me. I took a deep breath, turned the knob, and pushed the door open. This was it. I would finally get to the bottom of my aunt's plea and my own odd memories. The door creaked and revealed the room behind it. Lo and behold, It was none other than the attic just as I remembered it, window and all. But how? The sunlight came through the window and danced across the room brilliantly, leaving me awestruck. I walked forward to look outside to make sure that this was indeed the attic, and that I hadn't gone completely crazy. After peering out the window, that verdict was still up in the air. 2 stories below was my aunt's yard. The grass was green as ever, and the sky was clear as day. Everything was so vibrant. I looked over at my aunt's garden, and to my surprise, there was a person there. It was a woman, and she was gardening. Who was that, and why was she in my aunt's garden? She turned around, revealing her face, and to my surprise, it was my aunt. What? How? My aunt was dead. I watched as she was lowered into the earth. Just then, I heard the sound of footsteps from behind me. Startled, I turned around to face the noise. "Who are you?" a soft voice asked. It was my 10-year-old self standing just 20 feet away from me. I was in such a delirious state by this point that I decided to just go with it and converse with myself. "I'm a friend," is all I could think to say. "You're a friend of my aunt's?" he asked innocently. I had forgotten just how curious I was as a child. "Yes, a very dear friend." My younger self walked over to look out the window where I was standing. I stepped aside and let him do so. He saw our aunt outside gardening below and waved at her. She didn't notice. "Do you have an aunt?" he asked. "Yes, but she passed away," I said. "I'm sorry to hear that." Just then, an epiphany struck. Maybe this was the reason I was here. Maybe this was the closure I needed all along. "Listen to me. I know it's hard for you to understand right now, but someday your aunt will pass away too. I want you to spend as much time as possible with her and visit whenever you can. You mean the world to her, and you will regret it if you don't make an effort to be with her now, while you still can." "Okay," is all he said. That's all he needed to say. After walking around and looking at some of the old stuff in the attic, including some old books that caught his eye, my younger self left the attic to venture back to the basement and shut the door behind him. I looked out the window and noticed that my aunt had finished gardening and was now walking back to the house. This was when my next epiphany struck. I was beginning to remember more of the events from that day. It was all coming back to me. I remembered me as I look now, standing in the attic, the friendly bearded man with glasses. I remembered the conversation we had, and even discussing it with my aunt afterward. My astonishment was interrupted by more footsteps in the next room. This time they were my aunt's. I ran over to the door and listened. "You can't be down here," she yelled in a worried tone. I wanted to open the door and confront her, just to see her one last time, and to tell her that I'm sorry for never visiting. I reached for the knob, but I thought it best not to go out there. She would probably have thought that I was an intruder, lurking around her house. As I said before, she wouldn't recognize me all grown up. My apology would have to go unspoken. I could hear her scolding the younger version of me and then bringing me back upstairs. Instead of listening to find out what happened next, I just remembered. I could recall telling my aunt about the attic door in the basement and the friendly bearded man. She told me that I had quite the imagination and told me to wash up for dinner. Looking back now, I remember a troubled glint in her eye, especially after divulging what the bearded man told me. She seemed to know more about my experience than she let on. I stood there for a while, taking everything in. Eventually, I decided it was time for me to leave. I grabbed the knob and jiggled it. It wouldn't budge. I turned it a little bit harder, but to no avail. A wave of terror consumed me. This didn't make any sense. The doors in my aunt's house had no locks. Then again, nothing made sense up until this point either. I backed up a little and ran into the door. It remained still. I did this a few more times and even tried breaking the window. Nothing happened. Feeling weary, I sat down and took a breather. This is when I heard a distant echo of footsteps and voices coming from within the house. It was my friend and his girlfriend. I had almost forgotten about them. I was saved. In a relieved stupor, I called out to them. It became quickly apparent that they could not hear me from wherever I was. I heard them walking around, calling out my name. I increased my volume and started banging on the door. "I'm in here, guys," I yelled, not knowing whether I was below or above them. They still couldn't hear me. I began to panic. I started screaming at the top of my lungs and banging as hard as I could on the attic door. I received no response. With a dead voice and pained hands, I gave up. I put my back against the wall and slid down to a sitting position, a few tears streaming down my face. I just sat there and listened as my friend and his girlfriend conversed from within the house. Where could he be? He said he would meet us at the car, right? If he's not in the house, then where the hell is he, my friend asked his girlfriend. Did you try the basement, she asked. Yes, there's nothing but some old floorboards down there. What about the attic, she asked. I tried there too. It's just filled with a bunch of old, dusty antiques. We'll have to call the police and have them look for him too. He must have gotten lost in the woods looking for us. As they made their way out of the cottage, my heart sunk. If they'd already searched the basement and attic, then where was I? I quietly sobbed in the corner for a while before looking through some of my aunt's old things. It was all I could do at this point. I didn't care for any of it, save for one treasure of hers that caught my eye. It was a book with a blood-red symbol hand painted on the front. I had never seen anything like it before. I opened it up and read the beginning aloud. The spells in this book are to be followed precisely. If even one step is not executed properly, you might endanger yourself and those around you. Use these spells at your own risk. The odd nature of the preface littered my nerves with a sense of worry. Was my aunt a witch? Before turning the page, I noticed an old lace bookmark saving one of the pages. I opened up to it and looked at the chapter heading. Chapter 8, Horticulture. I glanced over at the next page and saw a spell meant to bring your garden to life. The ritual involved lighting some candles and making a circle of some special sand I've never heard. From within the circle you are to recite the spell, verbatim. My Latin was a little rusty, but from what I could read of the incantation, it said something along the lines of bring above that which is below, which I assumed referred to the growing of plants. I gathered that my aunt performed the ritual in the attic, as there were some dormant candles in with her stuff. The inclusion of this book in my aunt's collection now made sense to me. She wanted to spice up her dull garden with a bit of witchcraft. I can say with some confidence that it more than likely backfired. I'm now stuck in this damned place, a place that seems to be a realm of its own. I will more than likely spend an eternity here. I am growing now to accept my fate. She did warn me after all. I should have listened. This is my fault, and mine alone. With the endless paper and writing materials here in this old attic, I am left to do nothing but write down in words what has happened to me, in the hopes that someone may come across it, somehow the words of a living ghost. If you are reading this, please listen to what I have to say. Your time here is not boundless, and at any moment the horrid hand of the unknown could come knocking at your door, there to bereave your loved ones and steal you away from your blissful, ordinary existence. The cause of this sudden upheaval will be death, or in my case, something far worse. Last but not least, if you are ever in this neck of the woods and feel a need to stop in and say hi, go right ahead. I can't promise you that you'll get a response. I just want you to remember two things: your life is fleeting, so spend your time wiser than I did mine, and whatever you do, don't go in the basement. Melinda hated driving at night. She did her best to avoid it. Short trips to the store if she just realized she ran out of tampons or had nothing for dinner after getting home, that sort of thing happened now and then. But she did her best not to go out after dark unless someone was coming to pick her up. So naturally she found herself on the longest drive of her life tonight, with no moon, few stars, swirling clouds above her, and acres of forest on either side. As so many unpleasant things in her life, this was her father's fault. She hadn't seen or spoken to the bastard in 15 years, but just after falling asleep tonight, no, that was wrong. It would be yesterday by this time. Out of the blue, her phone rang, and his voice was on the other end. I need you, Melly. Please come now. He'd said just that, and then the line went dead. The old ass was probably drunk, but he'd never called her before, not since she was a child, and he was still trying to convince her mother to take him back. It felt like she had been dreaming, waking up to hear his voice again after all these years. It sounded like he was crying. His voice sounded just the same as the last time she'd heard it. As though in a dream, she had risen, dressed, and gotten in the car. She was well out of town and halfway to his old place before realizing that she had no way of knowing if he even still lived there. She received updates from her mother from time to time over the years about where he was. The last time she heard from her mother about him was 7 years ago. Had he ever stayed in one place that long? Not to her recollection. She had been 7 when her mother finally had enough and showed him the door. Prior to that, a move had come every few months. The house they had been living in was their longest stay in one place, a full 16 months. It turned into 2 years after that, and then the next house had been the one she left when she moved out on her own. In all that time, she heard from him sporadically at best, and had finally decided it was best to simply forget about him. Until tonight. She had found out after a 2-hour drive that she had been right to wonder if he was still in the same place. His last known address was a sketchy apartment in a low-income area of the town she had grown up in. Had he been number 24 or number 42? Maybe he was 14. It definitely had a 4. It didn't matter. His name wasn't on any of the buzzers. Bastard. Her drunk of a father had called her at night, all but demanding she come to him for reasons he didn't even feel were important enough to tell her over the phone, and then just expected that she would know where he lived now. In a flurry of rage, she turned and marched back to her car, slamming the door and starting off in the direction she came. She was so angry she didn't even look where she was going and missed her turn off. The next thing she knew, she was on this lonely stretch of road. Cars were sparse, but she took some comfort in the fact that she would pass one every half hour or so. Her dashboard clock now read 2:27 a.m. She had been driving for more than 5 hours since leaving her house. At night. Every 5 minutes or so, she checked her cell phone. Ever since realizing she was lost, she had checked her phone and found no bars at all. She even stopped at a gas station, closed of course, just sure there should be some service around here somewhere, but nothing. Take stock of your life, Melly, she thought. You're over 30, you hate your job, you and your mother don't get along, you haven't seen or spoken to your father in just under half your life, you have no time for your friends or a relationship thanks to the aforementioned job you hate, and now here you are. Trapped on a road you've never been on before, at night, and you can't even so much as call Amma, let alone check Google Maps. Smart lady you are. She briefly considered stopping and flagging down the next car that passed. She quickly realized the futility of that plan. Any car on this road would also have no service, so there was nothing for it. She'd have to drive until she saw a house. She'd feel bad for waking someone up, but there was no choice. She needed to find her way back to the main highway. But so far, all that she could see on either side was trees. Mile after mile of trees, no lights shining through the boughs. No sign that anyone had ever been here before, except that there was a road and people were obviously still driving on it. There weren't even any road signs other than the mile markers. Had she really found the middle of nowhere? She was just in the middle of this thought when her headlights illuminated something just up the road, a square, wooden sign obviously made by someone other than the government. This wasn't a gas food lodging sign, or a mile marker, or a distance to sign. This looked like the kind of signs advertising a private business was nearby. She slowed down to read it. Granny Royce's Roadhouse. Come stay the night at Granny's. She'll take good care of you. Room, board, low prices. Next exit. Her heart sped up. She certainly wasn't interested in spending a night at Granny Royce's, but every business had a phone. At the very least, she'd have a map, or know the way back to the highway. She decided she would stop there. She almost missed the turn. Granny Royce's Roadhouse was buried at the back of a long, dirt driveway, secluded amid the trees. She was almost past the little dirt road that led back to it before realizing it was there. She skidded to a stop and turned in. The little house lay ahead. It was 2 stories and looked to have about 8 to 10 rooms. Big for a home, but small for anything announcing room and board. She got closer and looked for a vacancy sign. Nothing. It wasn't that the sign wasn't lit, there was no sign. The porch light was on and the front of the building was illuminated by that light and by her headlights. No signs of any kind. She almost wondered if she'd gotten the wrong place, but she was certain that she had seen no other exits between this house and the sign announcing it. She paused in the driveway and took out her cell again. Still no service. She did a quick search for any available wireless signals. To her complete lack of surprise, there were none. Not even any secured. There's no one here but me, she thought. At this point, she wouldn't be surprised to find the house empty as well, but the light was on and this was supposed to be a roadhouse. Someone would be manning the front desk. She got out of the car and headed for the front porch. As she turned around to make sure the lights flashed when she hit the lock button on her fob, she thought she could see a flash of movement in the trees. Something human-shaped. She stopped and looked again. Nothing. She decided she imagined it. At the front door, she hesitated. If it really was a roadhouse, then she should be able to just go on in. But what if she got the wrong house? If she tried the door and just walked in, she could find herself arrested out here in buttfuck nowhere. Cautiously, she tried the knob. It turned. She pressed gently on the door. It opened. Relief flooded through her when she saw that she was in a small but tastefully decorated foyer that had obviously been repurposed as an admissions area. A quaint desk with an honest-to-God guest book had been placed in the far right corner and some chairs had been set out, along with magazines on a table. She read the titles briefly: Mademoiselle, Blue Book, The New Country Life, Arts Architecture, before turning her attention to the little desk. There wasn't a computer. That was a cute touch. It was like the house was from a past era. Perhaps old Granny Royce really didn't like modern technology. There was, however, a little bell, just like there would have been in 1929. It wasn't even the round silver kind you slap to ring, it was a little porcelain hand bell. This place was starting to out-cute her. Please let her have a phone, and please let it use the number plan, not 50s exchanges. She picked up the bell and gave it a shake. For a while, nothing happened. Then she saw a light come on in the back room, and the shadow of an old woman sprang up on the wall. The shadow moved toward her, and within a few seconds, she saw its owner, Granny Royce, who perhaps looked like every grandmother in every storybook ever. "Well, goodness me," she said. "My lands. Good morning, dearie. Pardon my tardiness, but it's been a while since we got guests at this hour. Can I take your name, honey?" Granny Royce was smallish, her gray hair tied in a neat bun behind her head, a dress that would have looked like it belonged to a senior citizen in the 20s, and a faded pink sweater. Melinda thought that she looked just like she would have wanted her own grandmother to look like, but her mother's mother had died when she was young, and she'd never met her father's mother. It almost hurt to deny this sweet little woman her business, but nevertheless, she had to get home. "Actually, I'm sorry," she began. "But the fact is, I'm lost. I'm not even sure where I am in the direction of." "Oh, you poor thing," said Granny Royce. "You just sit down and let me fix you some tea or something. You must be cold." "Really, thank you, but I'm okay," Melinda said gently. "I just need to use the phone, if I could, or if you've got a map. Even that would be lovely. I really only live a couple of hours from here." She trailed off, not knowing if she was even right about that. She easily could have driven those 5+ hours in the wrong direction entirely. "Oh dear," said the little woman sadly. "I'm sorry, honey, but the phone lines are down. As for a map, well, I used to have one, and if I look I still might, but it's probably quite out of date by now. The highway moved since then, I know that much." Melinda's heart sank. How could her luck get any worse? No phone, cell or landline, and no map. What could she do? She had to get back home. She was expected to work at 8 a.m. tomorrow. And why were the phone lines down? The weather was coldish but clear. Were they fixing a line nearby? She told Granny Royce the name of her town, but Granny only said, "Believe it or not, I've never heard of that town. What did you say the name was?" She told her again. "No, doesn't ring a bell. I'm sorry, but I could not say which direction it's in. Why don't you stay the night, sweetie? I'll give you a discount for your trouble." "Thank you. That's very kind of you. But I have work tomorrow and I need to get back home. I'm not even sure why I'm out tonight. The only reason I had doesn't seem to matter anymore." "Honey, I wouldn't advise trying to drive back that far tonight," Granny Royce said. "Why? It's almost 3 in the morning and you've not had any sleep. Maybe the lines will be up in the morning and you can call your work and let them know you'll be late." "That won't work," either she replied. "I'm the opener. No one will be there. No, I'm sorry. I've really got to leave. I'll head in the other direction until I find the road I was on." At that, Granny Royce's expression, already one of kind concern, seemed to shift somewhat to one of fear. She paused, looking at Melinda as though she wanted to say something else to keep her inside. Finally, she said reluctantly, "All right, honey, if you're sure. Just you be careful now. Don't speak to nobody until you're back on the road." That last warning seemed a little silly. After all, what was Melinda, a little girl? She thanked Granny Royce for her kindness and headed back to the car. About halfway to the car, she remembered thinking she saw something moving in the trees. Her eyes scanned both sides of the secluded little cleared area she was in, looking for anything that appeared to be moving on its own rather than being blown by the slight wind. She saw nothing. Satisfied, she headed for her car. All 4 tires were flat. God damn it. She leaned down and saw long slash marks on each tire. Someone in this little slice of green acres had slashed her tires in the time it took her to find out that she had no way of contacting anyone tonight. Kids from a local farmhouse, gotta be, she thought grimly. Nothing else to do, so you might as well go out at night and slash tires. She stopped and let the reality sink in. She wasn't going anywhere tonight. She had no choice now. She had to stay the night here until morning, when hopefully the phone lines would be up and she could call someone from work to ask them to go in for her, and then Emma to get her tires dealt with. She sighed and walked back in the house. She could hear Granny Royce as she was walking back to her room. She had already turned off the lights. Resigned to her fate, Melinda rang the little bell again. "That you, miss?" she heard Granny Royce call. "Yes, it's me," she answered. "Sorry to be a bother. My name is Melinda Orton. Sorry I never mentioned it before. I guess I will take a room for the night, if the offer's still good." "Oh, of course it is, dearie," said Granny Royce, re-entering the room and turning the lights back on. "Melinda. Oh, that's such a pretty name, honey. Well, let's get you situated. You put your name and arrival time in the book there and I'll get you a key. All the boarding rooms are on the second floor, and there's only a couple left. There are others here." This was surprising. Not a single car had been in the front lawn when she pulled in. "Oh yes," Miss Melinda Granny was puttering around in the adjacent room. "Mr. Norris, young Calvin. There's a few of us here." She came back out with a key in her hand. "Just out of curiosity, what made you change your mind?" She seemed to brighten as she asked the question, as though relieved that Melinda would stay after all. "Oh, it's probably just local kids getting kicks," she said. "But I found my tires slashed." Granny stopped suddenly, her face twisted with concern and worry. Then she resumed as though nothing was wrong. "Nothing to be done for it, I suppose," she said, with an air of sadness. "Well, not until morning, at any rate," said Melinda. "Then hopefully the lines will be up." "Oh," said Granny Royce, distractedly. "Yes, hopefully." She led Melinda up the darkened staircase into an empty, quiet hall, or perhaps not so quiet. From one end of the hall came the muffled sound of someone crying. Whoever it was crying softly, not with anger or petulance or fear, but with deep sadness. It sounded as if crying was something this person was used to, but they were still unable to stop. "Who is that?" she asked, pointing in the direction the crying was coming from. "Oh, pay that no mind, honey," said Granny. "That's just Mr. Norris. He's been like that a while. Older man, you understand. Not all there." She tapped her temple. "I understand," Melinda replied, but wondered privately how an old, out-of-touch man would wind up at a roadhouse. "Has he been here long?" "A while, I'd say," answered Granny. "Don't really recall how long exactly." "How does he pay for room and board?" "I guess he doesn't drive," she said to the old woman. "Actually, it doesn't look like anyone else here has a car." Granny started at this, looking up with an almost guilty expression. "Oh, well," she said, "that kind of thing is the business of the guests. I don't ask about such things." She turned the key in the lock of the room she had led Melinda to and opened the door. Turning on the light, she showed Melinda the quaint little room. Melinda thought it looked like stepping into the past. She could swear this room would have looked modern in the early 50s, at the earliest. Come to think of it, so could the rest of this place, she thought. No wireless service, no computer, that old bell. And those magazines, they looked new. But that thought was cut off as Granny put the key on the nightstand and started in with instructions. "Now, the bathroom is down the hallway there. You'll be sharing with the whole floor, so please bear that in mind if you have to go. There's a shower schedule on the door, as well. First come, first serve. You just add your name to the first available line, and that's the order the showers are in. I wouldn't worry about that if I were you, though. I'm sure you'll be first in line. I get up at 6 a.m. sharp every morning and start breakfast. But you come on down whenever you're ready and I'll whip something up for you. Oh, and one last thing, my dear. I would strongly advise you not to leave the house until sun up. You just never know what could happen out there. In the dark." "Of course," she replied. "I'd never go out there in the dark if I didn't have to." She stopped that train of thought right out of the gate. After a few moments, she was alone. Alone, without anything to wear to bed and nothing to shower, brush her teeth, or hair with in the morning. She sat on the bed and looked out the window, which faced front. Her car still sat where she had left it, the only thing for miles that seemed like part of her world. "And an expensive, over-large paperweight until I can get a hold of someone," she thought bitterly. Despite the hominess of the room, she felt an unwillingness to rise and shut off the light. Somehow the thought of going to sleep in this backward little room seemed unthinkable. So instead, she continued to sit and stare out the window. A figure in black detached itself from the shadows of the trees and made its way to her car. The hell. She jumped up and ran at the window. The figure was tall and seemed to be wearing a cloak made of night. She saw as its arm extended. In its hand was a long, jagged dagger. It dragged the dagger across the side of her car, leaving a long gash mark in the paint and metal. "Hey," she shouted. The figure kept dragging the dagger. She reached for the window to open it. It wouldn't budge. She looked for a lock, but couldn't see one. "Hey," she yelled again. This time the figure raised its head. She could see the glint of 2 eyes under the hood. The figure raised the dagger, slowly, determinedly. It pointed it straight at her face. She leaped away from the window and ran for the door. A noise on the other side stopped her. Footsteps. Dragging, shambling footsteps, and crying. The sound of a person for whom deep, longing sadness is a way of life. Mr. Norris. She waited. Somehow, she just felt that she should let the old man pass before she opened the door. Before he got very far, however, she heard other footsteps, these much quicker and lighter, run up the stairs and stop near the door of her room. "Stop it," hissed Granny Royce. "Go back in your room right now. You know better. She can't see you yet. Hopefully she won't have to at all. Now you go back in there. You've got no business being out at this hour anyway." What on earth? How could that sweet old woman talk to another human that way, let alone an old man with a foggy mind? She almost opened the door right then, but somehow her hand stopped and waited until the shuffling, crying man had made his way back down the hallway. She heard his door open. She opened her own door just in time to see his foot, shod in a well-worn house shoe, slide into his room. The door closed softly after him. That poor man, she thought. But now she was determined to find out what was going on. The punk outside in the Halloween costume slashing up her car, followed by Granny yelling at an old man, made her begin to understand that not all was well here. She went back down to the front desk area, which was completely unlit except for the moonlight and porch light coming through the window. There was, however, a light on near the back room that Granny Royce had emerged from before. Melinda paused to take a look outside the front window. The maniac with the dagger was nowhere to be seen for the moment, but she was now determined that it was he that she had seen moving through the trees. He could have killed me. She strode in the direction of the light, seeing that it was the light to the kitchen. She kept going, expecting to find Granny Royce still puttering about with whatever an old innkeeper did with herself during the early hours of the morning. Instead, she found Granny sitting with a young man of about 20. He had dark hair and a scruff of stubble and was wearing a dark brown corduroy shirt and khakis, along with a pork pie hat. He looked like he was ready to go sell newspapers on a street corner in the 30s. He was quietly sipping tea while Granny was admonishing him from the other end of the table. "Now, that was a horrible thing to say," she said. "When I was your age, young men minded their manners." "That's a laugh. Talking about my age," muttered the young man with a sneer. "And just how old are you? Do you even remember?" "Calvin Davidson, you are trouble, young man," she hissed back. Neither had noticed Melinda yet. "One of these days you're going to say something you'll regret." "Oh, come on, Granny. What could I possibly say that will make things worse than they already are?" demanded Calvin. "I mean, look at old Mr. Norris up there. Both of us are OL...UM. Hello, miss. I didn't know we had anyone else here." He had just seen Melinda. "Ah, hi," she said. She had the feeling she'd walked in on an old argument the two of them had had many times, and that did not concern her. Her fear and anger were forgotten for the moment. Calvin had been talking to Granny like a sullen kid, but something about what they were saying seemed wrong. "Can I help you?" Melinda asked Granny Royce. "Is there something wrong with your room?" That brought her back. "No," she said. "The room is fine, but nothing else is. I mean, what on earth do you even have a roadhouse out here where it seems like no one ever stops? Why are most of the rooms full even though mine is the only car out there? Why did I hear you talking to Mr. Norris like he was a dog? And why would you want to make sure I didn't see him?" She got no further before Calvin cut her off. "Good Lord, she's not even been here a night and she can see it. Why did you even let her in, Granny? Why don't you just bolt the door? Hell, if I could go take down that sign, don't you think I would have by now? Lord love a duck." There's something you don't hear many young men say, thought Melinda. She decided to ignore Calvin for the moment, otherwise. And besides that, there's someone out there. He's the freak who slashed my tires, and he's been out there messing up my car since then. And you can't even call the police. Are you going to tell me you've never had vandals out here before?" There was a long pause in the room. Neither Granny nor Calvin seemed willing to break it. Calvin scratched at his neck. For the first time, Melinda noticed a red slash at his throat, half hidden by his collar. It looked like either a very fresh scar or a slightly healed wound. "Listen, miss. I don't know your name," he finally said. "Melinda," she told him. "Melinda," he repeated. "Melinda, I think you should sit down. I have to tell you something that you may find ... troubling." Melina did not like how he said that. She also didn't like the way his tone had switched from sullen child to serious adult. He looked several years her junior, but he was talking to her like he was her uncle, or her boss. He swallowed a sip of tea and sighed. Then he looked her straight in the face and said, "The reason I don't have a car out there is that when I got here, no one my age, no one in my line of work, would have owned a car. It would have seemed like an impossible dream." What ... What are you talking about?" she asked, hesitantly. "I worked in a textile mill," he said. "The mill was shut down by the time I got here. Most businesses were, so I struck out on my own, a drifter looking for what work I could find, and I stopped here." "Forever." "Businesses were shut down ... I don't understand," said Melinda. "We're having a rough time of it right now, but businesses are mostly staying open." "Not then, they weren't," said Calvin, sadly. "I arrived here ... in 1929. Melinda blinked. Something had exploded behind her eyes. "This place was new then," said Granny. "My man and I had just opened it, and young Mr. Calvin was a sweet young lad of 16. I offered to take him on as hired help over my husband's objections. Well, my husband was a well-meaning man, but he knew how to pinch a penny. Was a year after I took Calvin on that Mr. Royce died. Calvin and I have been here ever since, and every few years or so, someone joins us." Yep, Calvin broke in. "Miss Tilly was first. She was a woman of ill repute who ran here, pregnant and scared that the man who'd run her trade up in New York was going to find her and kill her. She and that baby." He broke off, now seeming on the point of tears. "And then," said Granny, "there was Mr. Standish. He was a traveling minister. He doesn't travel anymore." "Mr. Norris got here in '69, said Calvin. "His story is probably the worst. He was a ... Well, he was a bank robber, you see. Carried a pistol. And he didn't like learning how long we'd all been here." He paused, stood and walked to the kitchen window. "He tried to leave on his own, you see. He ain't the first to try it. That was me, actually. I warned him not to try, but he wouldn't listen. But when he got outside ... then he met him." Calvin hissed Granny. "We don't talk about this." "She's gotta know," said Calvin. "There's no point in her finding out slowly." "There's still a chance for her," said Granny in a stage whisper. "All she has to do is wait until morning." "She's not going to wait until morning," said Calvin with some remorse in his voice. "No one ever waits until morning. The fact that she came down here is proof enough of that. Besides, what good would that have really done her? Her car is useless. We have no phones here. There was no phone when this place went up, and there won't never be a phone here. You know that." "Okay, everyone," Stop, Melinda shouted. "That's enough. Now, you can't keep me prisoner here, and I have no intention of staying any longer. Only that knife-wielding maniac out there is keeping me from running up the road this minute. Now, I need to know what's really going on here, and I need to know it now." "We've been telling you," Calvin said. "Granny may not want you to know everything, but you need to, because you won't be leaving. Oh, we're not trying to keep you prisoner. I don't even care if you run out that door right now, but you'll never leave this house again afterward." "Like hell I won't," yelled Melinda. "Listen," child, said Granny, rising from her spot at the table. "Listen, please. None of us mean you harm, my dear, not even Mr. Norris. There's scant he can do any more, and he knows it. That's why he's up there crying all the time. But we're stuck here, all of us. I hope there was a chance for you to run for it in the morning. But Calvin's right. There's no guarantee you'd be safe in the morning anyhow." "What ... hell ... is wrong with this place?" choked out Melinda. She was beginning to break down. She could feel the tears welling in her eyes. "It was about a month after Mr. Royce died," said Calvin, "when he came. He was wearing that long, black robe and carrying that ridiculous dagger. I saw him when I was trimming the hedges in the back. I told him he needed to get out of here because I didn't like his look. HE. moved so fast I never saw it coming. And he got me from here. Calvin touched his neck. To here, he touched his lower abdomen on the opposite side from the neck slash. He began to undo his shirt. Melinda almost vomited. Under his shirt was a long, ugly slash that went deep and was still seeping blood. She could see bone, muscle, and intestines wriggling within that mangled ruin. I died that night, said Calvin. But then I didn't. The next thing I knew, I was being dragged into the house by Granny, and when I woke up, I nearly scared her to death. She was sure that I was gone. The thing is, I was. But I was awake. I could talk, walk, do anything I could while alive. Well, except take any enjoyment or nourishment from food or drink anymore. I still drink that tea because it keeps my skin from turning ash gray. I learned that about 50 years ago. He didn't go away, though Granny broke in. I went out to deal with him, carrying my axe. He took my axe and buried it in my back. I won't show you the wound, honey. Calvin shouldn't have shown you his either. No one should have to see it. But that's how he works, Melinda, continued Calvin. He's got that knife, but if you try to use a weapon on him, he just moves like he does and takes it from you. You never stand a chance. He'll use whatever weapon you try to take him down with to end you. Mr. Norris learned that the hard way. This is not happening. Melinda was ready to break down. She had to hold it together. She had to get out of here somehow. Nothing about this was right. Nothing about it could be real. It was all a dream. Too much didn't make sense. Her father calling her out of the blue, her leaving to go to him without a second thought, getting lost so quickly and so irreversibly, no cell phone service anywhere on this road. This place, everything about it. She was dreaming that had to be it. But if so, she was going to survive this dream. She turned and ran for the stairs. Her purse was still in her room, but she was going to grab it and go. She'd had enough. Protesting voices began babbling behind her. She cared not one whit. Mr. Norris was waiting at the top of the stairs. Contrary to Granny Royce's description of him, he was not old at all, no more than about 40. But she saw instantly what she meant by not all there. The top half of Mr. Norris's head looked normal, like a reasonably attractive man with dark hair peppered with gray here and there. His eyes, a clear green, were moist with fresh tears. The lower half of his face was a ruin of bone fragments, shredded muscle and blood, so much blood. His left side was similarly destroyed. His arm hung on a few hanging strings of muscle. His hip was just as much a mess of bone and blood as his face was. He kept his one good hand on the banister as he shuffled toward her. Behind him stood a young woman in a bra and a pair of panties. Her stomach was cut open, and looking out of the wound with bright, intelligent eyes was the mangled remains of a baby. Melinda turned and bolted for the front door. Her hand had just closed around the knob when Calvin rushed up to her, placing his freezing cold hand over hers. "They're not going to hurt you," he said quickly. "But he will. If you step out for so much as a moment, he will kill you, and it will hurt. And it will go on hurting. Forever. After a while, you learn to function with the pain, but it never goes away." Sobbing, she asked the question she'd been afraid to ask since coming here. "Who is he?" "We don't know," said Granny, from behind Calvin. "He just came here, and he won't go away. He likes to watch us, and do things to incite us to come out again. As soon as someone does, he hurts them more. But no matter how many times he kills us, we don't die. Believe me when I say, we all wish we could." Melinda had had enough of this. She pushed Calvin away and threw open the door. He was standing on the porch. The knife was held out in front of him, just at face level. Melinda ran into him at a rush, the knife puncturing her right eye and its tip sliding on through, out the other side. She just managed to see the grinning, pure white face of her killer before everything went black. A few hours later, the house erupted with screams from upstairs as Melinda awoke to a world of pain, the like of which she'd never known.